Ethan had been riding since late afternoon, and the sky was already turning dark blue by the time he crossed the old riverbed. The cold came fast in that part of the desert. One moment the air felt sharp, the next it felt like thin ice was settling over everything. His horse snorted, clearly unhappy with the temperature drop, and Ethan rubbed its neck to keep it calm. He still had a long way home, but he knew the trail well enough to ride, even by starlight. All he wanted was to reach his warm cabin, eat something simple, and rest his tired back after fixing a windmill that kept fighting him all day. But just when he thought he would make it home without trouble, he saw something strange near an old wooden trail marker. At first, he thought it was just a blanket caught on a branch. The wind made it flutter a little, and he almost rode past it. But then his horse slowed on its own, ears twitching forward. Ethan frowned and shifted on the saddle. The blanket wasn't just lying there, it was moving slow, uneven, like someone inside was fighting to stay awake. He rode closer, and his heartbeat changed the moment he saw a hand appear from under the blanket. A small hand, thin and stiff from the cold. Ethan quickly got off his horse and knelt down. The bundle on the ground was a girl, an Apache girl curled up so tightly it looked like she was trying to make herself disappear. Her lips were pale, almost blue, and her eyes barely opened when she saw him. She looked terrified at first, as if she expected him to hurt her, but her fear shifted into desperation when the wind hit her again, and her teeth started shaking uncontrollably. She tried to speak, but only a weak sound came out. Ethan leaned closer, trying to hear her over the wind. That was when she whispered it. "Please, I need a man's warmth tonight." Her voice cracked, not from anything bold or forward, but because she was freezing. Her words were not romantic or suggestive. They were the last plea of someone who knew the cold might take her life. She needed body heat, shelter, fire, anything to stay alive. Ethan understood that right away. He didn't waste time. Carefully, he lifted her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, like she hadn't eaten properly for days. Her blanket didn't cover much, and her clothes were too thin for the winter night. Ethan wrapped his own coat around her, holding her firmly so she wouldn't slip. "It's all right," he said softly. "I've got you. You'll be warm soon." Her eyes closed, but her fingers gripped the front of his shirt as if she was scared he might let go. Ethan carried her to his horse, keeping her pressed against his chest. She trembled nonstop. The moment he was on the saddle with her in his arms, he nudged the horse forward. The animal seemed to understand the urgency and started moving faster than before. The wind cut into Ethan's back as he shielded the girl, and his coat was no longer protecting him. But he didn't care. He kept her close because she needed every bit of warmth he could give. His cabin wasn't too far, maybe half an hour if he rode hard. He whispered to the horse to keep steady. The trail was rough, and the girl was too weak to handle sudden bumps. Every few minutes, Ethan checked her breathing. She was still alive, but too quiet. Her forehead rested against his chest, and her hands were cold enough to make him worry. He tried talking to her to keep her awake. "What's your name? Can you hear me? Stay with me. All right?" But she barely responded. When the cabin finally came into view, Ethan felt a wave of relief wash over him. He stopped the horse right at the door, lifted the girl again, and rushed inside. The cabin was dark and freezing at first, but Ethan knew exactly what to do. He laid her on the bed, wrapped her tightly in thick blankets, then ran to start the fire. His hands were shaking from cold and worry as he struck the match, but the fire caught quickly. Flames rose and filled the room with warm light. Ethan kept feeding wood into the stove until the heat pushed away the icy air. Only when the fire grew strong did he return to her. The girl was still shivering under the blankets. Ethan moved slowly so he wouldn't scare her. "You're safe," he said softly. "The fire's warm now. You're going to be all right." She opened her eyes a little. She looked scared, confused, and exhausted, but she also looked like she wanted to believe him. He placed a kettle of water on the stove, then found the old heavy quilt his mother had sewn years ago. He wrapped it around her shoulders. She whispered something, but her voice was soft and unclear. He leaned a little closer, without touching her. She was trying to say thank you, but she couldn't finish the word. Ethan sat on the old wooden chair next to the bed and waited until the color started returning to her cheeks. He didn't ask questions. He didn't want to overwhelm her. Her situation was already stressful enough. She looked too young to be traveling alone and too weak to explain anything right now. When the water warmed, he made her a cup of tea using wild herbs he kept for cold nights. He blew on it until it wasn't too hot, then held the cup out to her. She sat up slowly, her hands still shaking, and took tiny sips. Her fingers bumped the cup a few times, but Ethan kept steadying it gently, without making her feel helpless. The room grew warmer, her shivering softened. She pulled the quilt tighter around herself and watched him with cautious eyes. It was clear she didn't know if she should trust him. Ethan understood. Her people had every reason to be wary of outsiders. He didn't try to win her trust with big promises. He just stayed calm, kept the fire burning, and made sure she had comfort and space. After almost an hour, she finally gathered the strength to speak. "My name is Nayeli." Her voice was soft but clearer now. Ethan smiled gently. "I'm Ethan. You're safe here, Nayeli." She nodded, though her eyes were still watering a little from relief. She pulled his coat closer around her, and Ethan could see she was finally warming up. She didn't say much after that, but she didn't look as afraid as before. The fire cracked softly, warming the cabin more and more. Outside, the wind howled across the desert, cold enough to freeze water solid. If he hadn't passed the old trail marker at the right moment, Ethan knew she might not have survived the night. The thought sent a chill through him deeper than the cold wind ever could. Nayeli leaned back against the pillows, exhausted but alive. She watched the flames as if trying to understand how she had ended up in a cowboy's cabin in the middle of nowhere. Ethan stayed near the fire, adding wood slowly, keeping the room bright and warm. He didn't know who had left her out there or why she was alone. He didn't know what dangers she had escaped or what fears she carried. All he knew was that tonight, she was safe. And tomorrow he would figure out how to get her home. For now, the only thing that mattered was keeping her warm and alive through the freezing desert night. The night passed slowly inside the small cabin. And even though the fire kept the room warm, Ethan barely slept. He stayed in the chair beside the bed, checking on Nayeli every few minutes. She looked peaceful for the first time since he found her, but her breathing was still a little weak, and he didn't want to risk leaving her alone. The wind outside blew against the cabin walls, like distant cries, and every sound made him more alert. He kept adding wood to the fire until its glow filled every corner of the room. By morning, the storm had softened. The wind still whispered across the land, but the bitter cold had eased a little. Ethan stretched his stiff back and quietly stepped toward the window. A pale sun had risen, painting the desert in soft gold. He could see his horse moving near the fence, brushing frost off the ground as it searched for leftover hay. Everything looked calm, but Ethan knew he couldn't relax yet. Someone must have been with Nayeli before she ended up alone. People didn't just wander into the desert without reason. He turned back to her and saw her eyes slowly opening. She blinked several times, confused at first, as if she wasn't sure where she was. When she noticed him sitting nearby, she pulled the quilt closer around her shoulders, but not out of fear, more like she was trying to collect her thoughts. "Good morning," Ethan said gently. "How are you feeling?" She pressed her lips together for a moment before answering. "Warmer. Much warmer." Her voice was soft, but it no longer shook like the night before. Ethan poured warm water from the kettle into a tin cup and handed it to her. "Drink this slowly. You need it." She obeyed without arguing, taking short sips while her eyes wandered around the small cabin. The shelves lined with jars, the wooden table, the saddlebags stacked in the corner, the old coat hanging by the door. Every detail seemed strange to her. She wasn't used to a place built by a lone settler. Ethan noticed how carefully she looked at everything, as if she expected danger hiding somewhere. "You're safe," Ethan said again, trying to ease her worry. "I won't let anything happen to you." Nayeli nodded but didn't relax completely. She looked tired, like she had carried fear with her for a long time before he found her. After finishing the cup of water, she placed it on the nightstand and sat up straighter. Ethan waited until she seemed a little stronger before asking, "Do you remember what happened before I found you?" She hesitated. Her hands tightened around the quilt. Her eyes lowered. It was clear she wasn't ready to tell the whole story yet. Ethan didn't push. He knew that forcing someone to talk never brought truth, it only brought more fear. "You don't have to explain everything now," he said gently. "Just tell me one thing. Were you alone by choice? Or were you running from something?" Her breath caught slightly. That reaction told him more than any words. Ethan pulled another chair to the bed so she wouldn't feel trapped. "I want to help you get home, but I need to know if someone dangerous is looking for you." Nayeli finally lifted her eyes. They were deep, worried, but honest. "I got separated," she whispered. There was noise. Shouting. Horses running in every direction. It happened so fast. I tried to find my people, but the desert felt too big. When the cold came, I couldn't walk anymore. Ethan listened carefully. Something about her explanation felt true, but he sensed there was more hidden behind it. Fear of someone. Fear of being caught, but if she wasn't ready to speak, he wouldn't pressure her. She needed safety first, not questions. "You did the right thing by staying near that trail marker," Ethan said. "If you had wandered farther, I might not have seen you." She looked at him with a small, fragile hope in her eyes. "I thought I would not live," she said quietly. "I thought the night would take me. I thought the night would take me." Ethan shook his head lightly. "Not while I was out riding. I'm glad I found you." Her gaze softened, grateful yet unsure how to show it. She held his coat tighter around her like it carried warmth and safety she didn't want to lose. Ethan stood and moved to the stove. "You should eat something. You need strength if we're going to travel later." He cooked a simple breakfast: eggs, dried meat softened in a pan, and warm bread he had baked the day before. When he placed the plate in front of her, she stared at it for a long moment. It was clear she hadn't eaten a proper meal in days. "You can eat," Ethan encouraged. "It's for you." She nodded, and began eating slowly at first, then with more need. Ethan didn't comment on how hungry she was. He just quietly cleaned the cabin and checked the saddlebags. When she finished, there was a little color back in her cheeks. She placed the empty plate aside and sat quietly for a moment. Then she asked softly, "Will you take me to my people?" "Yes," Ethan said, "as soon as you're ready." She looked relieved. But another emotion crossed her face. A shadow of fear. "The desert feels dangerous now," she admitted. "I don't want to go alone." "You won't," Ethan said firmly. "I'll ride with you." That promise made her calm again. He stepped outside to prepare the horse. The air was colder than he liked, but the sun warmed it just enough for travel. As he saddled the horse, he kept glancing at the horizon. Tracks from the night wind were wiped clean, but something bothered him. There were faint marks, fresh ones farther up the ridge. They didn't match his horse's steps. Someone else had been riding nearby. This wasn't something he wanted Nayeli to know yet, not until he understood who had passed through. He returned inside, brushing the cold from his jacket. Nayeli looked stronger now, though still cautious. She stood slowly, testing her legs, and Ethan watched closely in case she stumbled. She managed to walk a few steps without trembling. "You're getting better," he said. "But we'll ride easy. I don't want you pushing yourself too hard." She nodded. "Thank you for everything. I did not expect anyone to help me. My people say outsiders don't care for us." Ethan looked at her gently. "Your people don't know me. I don't leave folks behind in the cold." Her eyes dropped, touched by the kindness she wasn't used to receiving. When she put on her moccasins and wrapped the quilt around her shoulders, Ethan opened the door and helped her outside. The sunlight touched her face, and she squinted at the brightness. The horse stood calmly, waiting. Ethan lifted her onto the saddle first, making sure she was secure, then climbed up behind her. She kept her hands on the saddle horn, and Ethan held the reins firmly. As they started moving, the cabin grew smaller behind them, and the wide desert opened before them. Quiet, cold, and stretching endlessly toward the canyon where her people might be. Nayeli spoke softly, almost a whisper. Ethan, I was afraid of you last night. But not now. Ethan didn't look down at her. He kept his eyes on the trail. You don't need to fear me, he said calmly. My only goal is to get you home safe. She nodded, leaning slightly forward as the horse moved gently across the land. They rode together in silence for a while, the horse's steady steps echoing across the dry earth. But even as they traveled, Ethan's mind kept returning to the tracks he had seen earlier. Someone else was in the desert. Someone who might have been following her, and before long, he would have to find out who. The sun climbed slowly above the desert as Ethan guided the horse across uneven ground, keeping the pace steady so Nayeli wouldn't tire. She sat in front of him on the saddle, wrapped in his warm coat and the quilt, her hands resting lightly on the horn. The cold morning air brushed across their faces, but at least it wasn't as bitter as the night before. Even so, Ethan kept a close eye on her. Every now and then, he asked quietly, You holding up all right? And she would nod gently, without turning her head. The land around them looked peaceful at first glance, but Ethan didn't let the calm fool him. He kept scanning the ridges, the dry bushes, and the distant shapes that shifted in the heat. The memory of those fresh tracks he had seen near his cabin made him uneasy. He could not tell if they belonged to friendly riders, hunters, or someone with reasons to follow Nayeli. Until he knew, he had to stay alert. Nayeli seemed deep in thought. Every few minutes, she looked out over the land like she was searching for familiar signs, footpaths, rock formations, or small plants her people used as markers. Ethan could tell she knew the desert far better than he ever would, but fear clouded her movements. Even when she recognized something, her shoulders tightened, as if she wasn't sure she trusted her own memory after what she had been through. After nearly an hour of quiet riding, she finally spoke. There is a narrow path ahead, she said softly. It leads toward the canyon where my people were last week. Ethan studied the area she pointed to. He noticed a faint trail winding between two ridges, barely visible unless someone knew where to look. Good eye, he said. We'll take that path. The horse shifted smoothly into the narrow pass. The land grew quieter here, with the walls of red stone rising on both sides. The shadows made the air cooler, and Ethan saw Nayeli shiver slightly. He gently pulled the quilt tighter around her shoulders, and she whispered, Thank you. Her voice sounded more stable than yesterday, and that gave him a bit of comfort. They traveled deeper into the canyon. The walls rose higher, blocking most of the sunlight. It felt like stepping from open sky into a hidden world where sound traveled differently. Even the horse's footsteps echoed softly. Ethan liked this part of the desert. When he rode alone, it felt peaceful. But today, his chest felt tight, his senses sharp. The tracks he had seen still troubled him. After a while, he asked quietly, Nayeli, the people who were chasing you before you got lost, do you know who they were? She didn't answer at first. Her hands tightened on the saddle horn. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled just a little. I do not know for sure. I heard horses. I heard angry voices. I heard one of my uncles shout for us to run. Then everything became loud and confusing. Ethan nodded slowly. So you're not sure if it was another tribe? Or someone else entirely? She shook her head. No. But I know my people would never leave me behind on purpose. They must be searching. I believe that, Ethan said. We'll find them. She turned her head slightly, enough to glance at him. You speak with calm. You make me feel safe. Ethan didn't smile, but his voice softened. That's the goal. They continued through the canyon until it widened again into an open plain. Here, the land stretched far, with tall grass waving gently despite the cold. A few birds circled high above. Ethan stopped the horse and scanned the horizon carefully. Something caught his eye, faint dust rising far to the east. He narrowed his eyes. Nayeli noticed his focus and followed his gaze. Do you see something? Maybe, Ethan said. Could be riders. She stiffened instantly. My people? Could be. he replied honestly. But it could also be someone else. Nayeli said nothing, but he felt her tension. She kept her eyes fixed on the far ridge, waiting for the shapes to become clear. Ethan knew they needed to stay cautious. He nudged the horse into motion again and headed toward higher ground so they could get a better view. When they reached the small rise, Ethan stopped again. The dust cloud was faint, but growing. Now he could see the distant shapes of horses, at least 4 or 5 riders, still too far to identify. Cold air brushed against his face as he kept watching. Nayeli whispered, "I feel scared." Ethan looked down at her gently. "You're not alone." "I'm here." She nodded, trusting his voice more than the uncertain land ahead. They stayed still for a few more minutes, watching the approaching shapes. Ethan realized the riders were taking a path that curved toward the same canyon exit they had used. They might cross paths sooner than expected. "We'll move toward the western edge," Ethan said. "I want space between us until we know who they are." He guided the horse away from the plain and into a stretch of land filled with tall grass and scattered rocks. The ground here gave them some cover. As they moved, Nayeli kept glancing back. Her breathing grew quicker. But she didn't panic. Instead, she whispered, "My uncle said some men from the settlements were angry last week. They thought we took something. But we did not." Ethan's expression hardened slightly. "Sometimes fear makes people blame the wrong folks." "Yes," she whispered. "My people were trying to move away from trouble." Ethan understood now that she might fear both strangers and misunderstandings. The desert had many stories like that. They rode toward a cluster of rocks where they could observe without being seen. Ethan helped Nayeli off the horse for a moment, so she could rest her legs. She sat behind a flat boulder while Ethan stood tall enough to watch the riders approach. The figures grew clearer. 5 riders. Dressed differently than most Apache riders Ethan had seen. These men wore stiff jackets and broad hats. More like settlers or ranch hands. Ethan's jaw tightened. Their posture looked tense. They rode with purpose. Scanning the land as if looking for someone, Nayeli breathed shakily. "Not my people," she whispered. "No," Ethan confirmed. "Not them." Fear flashed across her face. "Are they searching for me?" Ethan crouched beside her. "Maybe not. But we won't let them see us until we know what they want." Her eyes widened. "What if they think you took me from my people?" He had already thought of that. Anyone who didn't know the truth could easily misunderstand. "Then I'll tell them the truth," Ethan said calmly. "But we won't walk into trouble. We'll stay ahead." The riders paused at the canyon entrance. They looked at the ground, studying tracks. Ethan felt tension rise in his chest. One of the riders pointed toward the direction of his cabin. Another pointed to the canyon trail exactly where Ethan and Nayeli had traveled. Nayeli grabbed his sleeve. "They are following." Ethan looked at her with steady eyes. "Then we keep moving." He helped her back onto the saddle and climbed behind her. They moved west, staying close to the rocky terrain so their tracks wouldn't be too obvious. The riders behind them began spreading out, checking the land, searching for something or someone. Nayeli spoke softly. "Ethan, I am afraid they will try to take me." Quote, "I won't let that happen," he said with calm determination. They traveled for nearly an hour through rough land. The horse climbed over stones and dipped through narrow paths. The riders behind them grew smaller, but did not disappear. At times, Ethan could see their silhouettes far behind, still moving in the same direction. Finally, the land ahead opened into a valley dotted with trees and dry bushes. Beyond that valley lay the deeper route that led toward the mountains where Nayeli believed her people were. Nayeli turned slightly. "If we reach the mountainside, my people will see the smoke from a fire. They will know someone is nearby." "That's what we'll do," Ethan said. But before they could continue, a sharp cry echoed from the ridge above them. Ethan's heart jumped. He pulled the reins tight, stopping the horse. Nayeli froze. On the ridge, 3 riders appeared. Not the ones behind them, these were Apache riders. Nayeli gasped, life flooding into her eyes. "My people," she whispered. But before she could call out, Ethan raised a hand gently. "Wait." Let them see who we are first. We need them calm. The riders above paused. They studied Ethan and Nayeli from the high ground. The wind carried the sound of their horses breathing. Then, suddenly, one rider raised his arm in recognition. Nayeli whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "That is my uncle." Ethan exhaled slowly. Relief washed through him, but the moment of calm didn't last long. More riders appeared behind the uncle's group, armed, tense, riding fast. Nayeli saw them and clutched Ethan's arm. "Ethan! Someone else is chasing." He nodded once. The real danger was only now beginning. The moment Nayeli recognized her uncle on the ridge, her whole body seemed to fill with hope. Her fingers gripped Ethan's coat, as if she had found the lifeline she feared she would never see again. But that hope mixed with sudden fear when more riders appeared behind the Apache group, fast, forceful, and clearly tracking something. The desert wind carried the tension like a warning, and Ethan knew this moment could shift in any direction. He kept one hand on the reins, and the other gently on Nayeli's arm. "Stay calm," he whispered. "Your people see us. They'll come down slow." Nayeli nodded, but her breathing was unsteady. "My uncle will protect us. But those other riders, who are they?" "I'm not sure," Ethan said honestly. "But we'll stay together until we know." From the ridge, her uncle raised his hand again, this time signaling his group to move. The Apache riders guided their horses carefully down the slope, keeping a watchful eye on Ethan and Nayeli. They didn't charge. They didn't shout. They approached with caution, as if trying to understand how an outsider was riding with one of their own. Ethan straightened his back, kept his horse steady, and didn't make sudden movements. He wanted to show respect, not fear. Nayeli's uncle reached them first. He was a strong man with sharp eyes, wrapped in traditional clothing that moved softly with the wind. His face held deep worry, but also a glint of relief when he saw Nayeli alive. He spoke in Apache first, his voice emotional. Nayeli answered quickly, tears filling her eyes. Ethan couldn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. It was family calling out to family, fear turning into gratitude. After their exchange, the uncle turned to Ethan. His expression hardened. "You," he said in accented English. "Why is she with you?" Ethan kept his voice calm. "I found her near a trail marker last night. She was freezing and alone. I brought her to my cabin to keep her warm and safe." The uncle's eyes narrowed, studying every part of Ethan's face. He wasn't looking for fear, he was looking for truth. Several other Apache riders formed a half circle around Ethan, watching silently. Nayeli stepped between Ethan and her uncle, placing one hand on her uncle's arm. "He saved me," she said firmly. "I would not be alive without him." Her uncle watched her carefully. The riders around them exchanged glances. Her words mattered more than anything Ethan could say. Finally, the uncle nodded slightly. "Then, we thank you, cowboy," he said, though his tone still carried caution. "But what of those men behind us?" Ethan looked toward the ridge where dust still rose in the distance. "They were following our trail. I didn't want them reaching Nayeli before her people did." The uncle's expression darkened. "Those men came yesterday. They shouted many things. They believed someone among us took their animals. They demanded answers. We told them we took nothing. But they did not listen." Nayeli's eyes widened. "They chased us because of that?" Her uncle nodded. "They saw you, and thought taking you might force us to speak. We ran. But in the chaos, we lost you." Ethan felt anger rise in his chest. Not the kind that pushed him to fight, but the kind that pushed him to protect. "Those men won't get her now," he said. Nayeli's uncle gave a firm nod. "No, they will not." But before anyone could say more, a sharp whistle cut across the valley. One of the Apache riders turned quickly. Dust swirled from the east. The other group of riders had found the trail. "They are coming," one Apache warrior said. Nayeli's uncle gripped his reins. "We cannot stay open on this land. We must move toward the trees," Ethan agreed. The open valley gave too much advantage to the approaching men. "Let's move," he said. The Apache riders formed a protective circle around Nayeli. Ethan rode within it, keeping close to her. He wasn't sure if her people fully trusted him yet, but they trusted her words enough to let him stay. They guided their horses toward a cluster of trees at the valley's edge, thick cottonwoods whose branches offered both shade and cover. As soon as they reached the trees, the Apache riders positioned themselves strategically. Some moved ahead to scout. Others took places behind the trunks, ready to watch the incoming men without being seen. Nayeli stayed close to her uncle. Ethan sat on his horse a few feet away, not wanting to intrude but staying near in case he was needed. The sound of approaching riders grew louder. The group chasing them arrived at the valley, stopping at the ridge where the land dipped. They scanned the area, noticing fresh tracks leading toward the trees. "Do they know we're here?" Nayeli whispered. "Not yet," Ethan said softly. "But they will soon." Her uncle raised his hand, signaling for silence. Everyone waited. The wind brushed through the leaves. The horses breathed quietly. The tension felt thick, pressing on every heartbeat. The approaching riders moved into the valley. They were 5 men, wearing belts and jackets from nearby settlements. Their faces were stern and impatient. One of them pointed to the ground. "They see the tracks," Ethan murmured. Nayeli's uncle leaned closer to her. "Stay behind me, no matter what happens." Ethan felt the weight of the moment building. He wasn't a fighter by nature, but he wouldn't let anything happen to Nayeli. The Apache riders around them were skilled and alert. They knew how to protect their own, but misunderstandings could spark quickly, and one wrong move could turn the situation dangerous. The 5 men rode closer to the trees, slow and cautious. They knew someone was hiding there. One of the men called out loudly, "We know you're there. Someone took our horses, and we know you saw something. Come out now." Nayeli flinched at the harsh tone. Ethan's jaw tightened. The uncle stepped forward on his horse, not fully out of the trees but far enough to be seen. "We took nothing," he called back. His voice was strong, steady. "Your anger brought danger upon us yesterday. We will not allow it again." One of the men pointed directly at Nayeli. "That girl ran when we tried to talk." "That seems guilty enough." Nayeli's breath hitched. Ethan leaned slightly forward on his saddle but stayed quiet, waiting for the right moment. Her uncle raised his chin. "You chased her. She is a child. That is not how men speak for truth." The men muttered among themselves. Their leader finally shouted, "We just need answers." Ethan guided his horse forward a step, not threatening, but clear. "I found the girl freezing in the desert. She was alone. If you think someone here took your horses, then you are looking in the wrong place." The men stared at him. "Why are you helping them, cowboy?" "They ain't your people." Ethan's voice stayed calm, but firm. "She was cold and scared. That's enough reason." The Apache riders shifted slightly, showing unity. The settlers hesitated. They weren't prepared for a united front, especially one that included a cowboy they didn't expect. One of the Apache scouts returned from higher ground and whispered something to Nayeli's uncle. The uncle nodded and turned to the settlers again. "Your horses were found. They wandered off near the south ridge. My riders saw them grazing. No one took them." The settlers looked confused, then embarrassed. They exchanged glances. Their anger softened into uncertainty. Finally, the leader exhaled loudly. "We didn't know," the uncle responded. "Sometimes it is better to listen before shouting." The men muttered among themselves again, then slowly began turning their horses around. The leader gave Ethan a long, thoughtful look. "You're not like most," he admitted. "We'll be going." When they rode away, the tension faded like a heavy cloud drifting off. Nayeli let out a long breath she had been holding. Her uncle placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You are safe now," he said. Ethan slowly relaxed his grip on the reins. He looked at Nayeli, relieved. She gave him a small, grateful smile, one that said more than words. Her uncle turned to Ethan. You protected her. You stayed when danger followed. For that, we owe you." Ethan shook his head. "You don't owe me anything. I just did what anyone should do." The uncle looked at him deeply. Not everyone would. The Apache riders formed around Nayeli again. But this time, their posture was calm, respectful. They weren't guarding her from Ethan, they were including him in their safe space. Her uncle spoke again, quieter. "Come with us. Our camp is near. You will be welcomed as a friend." Ethan nodded slowly. "I'll come, just to make sure everything ends well." Nayeli's eyes softened. "I want you to come," she said gently. And so they rode together toward the distant canyon, the danger behind them and the warmth of trust beginning to grow between two worlds that rarely walked side by side. Ethan rode with Nayeli and her people as the afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the land. The danger had passed, but the memory of the tension still sat in the air like a fading echo. Nayeli stayed close to her uncle, while Ethan followed a little behind, giving the family space but staying near enough to help if needed. He felt a quiet calm settle in his chest now that Nayeli was safe. Yet he also felt a strange tug, a feeling he couldn't name. Maybe it was the relief of seeing her reunited with her people, or maybe it was something softer, something that came from the bond formed during those frightening hours in the desert. The group traveled toward the canyon where the Apache camp had been set up. The land grew more beautiful as they neared the mountains. The rocks glowed orange from the sunlight, and patches of green shrubs appeared between the stone walls. Ethan didn't often ride this deep into their territory, and he felt honored that they let him travel with them without hesitation. It meant they believed what Nayeli had said about him, and that trust carried weight. As they reached the entrance of the canyon, soft smoke from cooking fires rose into the sky. Ethan saw children running near the tents, women preparing food, and elders sitting in shaded spots. When the riders entered the camp, several people gasped and rushed forward. Nayeli's mother appeared among them, her face filled with fear that quickly burst into tears of relief when she saw her daughter alive. Nayeli slipped off her horse before it even stopped moving and ran into her mother's arms. Ethan watched quietly, feeling something warm inside him. It was a beautiful sight. Family reuniting after a night of fear. The mother held Nayeli close, hands trembling as she touched her daughter's face, her hair, her shoulders, as if making sure she was real. Some of the Apache riders around them explained what had happened, pointing toward Ethan as they told the story. Nayeli's mother turned to the cowboy. Her eyes softened, filled with gratitude. She stepped forward slowly, unsure at first if it was proper to approach him directly. Ethan dismounted, giving her a respectful nod. She placed her hand over her heart and spoke in soft English. "Thank you for saving my daughter." Ethan replied humbly, "I just did what anyone should do. I'm glad she's back where she belongs." The mother smiled faintly, and her expression carried more meaning than her words. It told him he had done something important, something her family would remember for a long time. Nayeli came to stand beside her mother, but her eyes searched for Ethan again and again. When she finally stepped forward and spoke, her voice was small but steady. "I wanted to thank you again for staying with me, for keeping me warm and safe." Ethan gave her a gentle smile. "You were very brave, Nayeli. The desert is harsh at night. You kept fighting, and that's why you're here." She lowered her gaze shyly but smiled back. Her uncle approached next, carrying the authority of a leader. He looked at Ethan with the seriousness of someone who had many responsibilities resting on his shoulders. "You are welcome in our camp," he said. "You will sit with us, eat with us, and rest. It is our way to honor someone who protected one of our own." Ethan nodded gratefully. "I appreciate that. I didn't expect anything, but I'm honored." The Apache men guided Ethan's horse to a shaded area and offered him water. Several young boys stared at him curiously, whispering to each other, fascinated by the lone cowboy in their camp. Ethan chuckled softly to himself. He wasn't used to being the center of attention. As the evening settled in, the camp became lively with activity. Fires crackled, filling the air with a warm glow. The smell of cooked food drifted through the canyon, and children's laughter echoed between the stone walls. Ethan was invited to sit near the main fire where the elders gathered, but he chose a respectful place, a little closer to the edge, so he wouldn't intrude. Nayeli's uncle brought him a bowl of warm stew. "Eat," he said calmly. "You need strength for your journey home." Ethan accepted it with gratitude. "Thank you." The stew was simple but full of flavor, warmed by herbs and vegetables grown deeper in the valley. As he ate, Nayeli walked toward him quietly, holding something wrapped in cloth. She sat on the ground a small distance from him, close enough to speak but still respecting her people's customs. "I made this," she said, unwrapping the cloth to reveal a piece of flatbread sprinkled with herbs. "It is not much, but I wanted to give it to you." Ethan smiled warmly. "That's very kind, Nayeli. Thank you." She watched him take a bite, and her face lit with a little relief when she saw he genuinely enjoyed it. "You are different," she said softly, almost as if the words slipped out by accident. "You did not fear me. You did not think badly of me." Ethan shook his head gently. "There's no reason to fear someone in need." She thought about that, her eyes drifting to the fire. "Sometimes people do not think like you," she whispered. Ethan didn't push for details. He let the silence speak for a moment. A few elders nearby murmured prayers of thanks for her safe return. Others talked about the riders who had chased the tribe. The story spread quickly through the camp, growing in detail as each person added their own voice. As night deepened, the sky filled with countless stars. The firelight made the shadows dance on the canyon walls. Ethan sat comfortably, feeling more at peace than he had in a long time. It wasn't his home, but something about the place felt welcoming. Nayeli's uncle sat next to him later, speaking in a more relaxed tone. "You came into danger for my niece. Our people do not forget actions like that. If you ever travel near our lands again, you may come without fear." Ethan nodded. "I appreciate the trust." The uncle added, "Trust is not given easily. But Nayeli spoke well of you." Ethan glanced at her. She was sitting with her mother now, talking quietly. The firelight reflected in her eyes, making them look warm and alive. He felt grateful he had been there for her. As the night grew late, Ethan stood to stretch his back. Nayeli noticed and approached once more. "Will you leave tomorrow?" she asked softly. "I think so," Ethan said. "Your people need time to rest, and I need to return home." He smiled kindly. "But I'm glad I came this far with you." She hesitated before speaking again. "I will miss your voice. The way you stayed calm even when danger came." She looked at the ground shyly. "I felt safe with you." Ethan placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, careful and respectful. "You're strong, Nayeli. You would have survived even without me. I just helped when you needed someone." She looked touched by his words. Her mother called her name, and she stepped back, but not before giving him one last grateful smile. When everyone settled to sleep, Ethan was given a place near the outer part of the camp. He lay under the stars, listening to the soft murmurs of the camp drifting off. He felt a peaceful heaviness in his chest, a mixture of relief, pride, and something else. Something warm that grew from the bond shared between him and the girl he had rescued. In the early morning, before the sun fully rose, Ethan prepared his horse. Nayeli and her uncle came to see him off. Her uncle offered him a small, carved, wooden token, a symbol of gratitude and friendship. "Carry this," he said. "It will show others that our tribe trusts you." Ethan accepted it with deep respect. "Thank you." Nayeli stepped forward last. She placed his coat back in his hands. "You gave me warmth," she said softly. "Now, I give it back with thanks." Ethan draped the coat over his arm and nodded. "Take care, Nayeli," she whispered. "You too." With that, Ethan climbed onto his horse. He gave the tribe a final, respectful nod and turned toward the open desert. As he rode away, he heard voices calling blessings behind him. Nayeli stood at the edge of the camp, watching him until he became a small figure against the morning light. Ethan didn't look back at first, but when he finally did, he saw her still standing there, A quiet reminder of the unexpected connection formed between a lone cowboy and a lost Apache girl on the coldest night of her life. And as he rode toward his cabin, he knew he would never forget her, nor the trust her people had given him. Something deeper and more meaningful than any treasure the desert could ever hide.